communities that work better, to solve a lot of these problems that have been hanging around. I've spent a good bit of time in politics, but I can tell you it's not just politics that's the answer. Because there are even studies here in state legislatures that show women of both political parties are more likely, and I don't know about California here, but are more likely to put forward legislation and to get it passed on family issues, on education issues, on health issues, on environmental issues. That's a priority list that they share. Now, California, you have this two-thirds stuff that really sort of, put a monkey wrench into that. So it seems to me from reading from the outside like politics prevails and that nothing else much gets in the way there. But in other states, it is in fact a way to change. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do. And I really want each of you to think first of yourself, because each of us has the power of one to be able to make change happen. And that's the most important thing I can leave with you. I do talk in the book about how do we break the myths and the stereotypes that are out there. I talk about what are the skills you need to be an effective leader that you can get on your own. I talk about the confidence factor. Too many women don't think they have the experience or the skills to take the next step up. Just look around. Very few guys seem to be bothered with that question. You can learn a lot on the job. You don't have to know everything the day that you start, because you have inherent skills and you have creativity and energy. But let me just talk about the power of one, because my time's up and that's where I'm going to stop tonight. The power of one is what each one of us can do every day from wherever you are. If you have a job where you can, in fact, hire people or promote people or recommend people for things, think first of women. Think first of women because that's where most of the qualified people are right this minute. Women are graduating from college in much higher numbers. Women are the entrepreneurs of America. Think women first. Not because you're doing it to be special, but because that's where the quality is to answer the questions. If you're a mom, take a look at who's on the school board here. Take a look at who's on the board of your church, who's on the board of the PTA, who's ready to take a leadership position that you could help move up, help encourage them to take the next step. Think about doing it yourself. Stepping up to even the smallest of issues. I'm going to tell a story on Kate, actually. She went to Linda's program that you'll hear about, I think, when she speaks. And she said when she first went to that program, she wasn't comfortable speaking publicly. I think she did a fine job, don't you? Practice makes perfect. With the power of one, we can each step up to making it different. So I hope you'll join together, that you'll join with me, you'll join with the WHIP and the other organizations that are sponsoring this today to actually come together around making sure we do have the 30% solution. That's the tipping point for equality. It's the tipping point for changing from where we are to where we need to be. Thank you.
And select some for questions. All right, thank you very much. And we are going to get to the panel, starting with Dr. Amy Sands, and then we will hear from Christine Grum and Linda Alapin. Thank you all again.
Well, I'm just pleased that I've been asked to be on this panel. I actually feel very honored to be in the presence of these women who are clearly out there making a difference. As we talked in my office earlier today, I think I'm going to learn a lot from tonight. And I see that my role here is going to be to give you some personal reflections on someone who's sort of worked throughout my career in the national security area, as you could tell from my resume, but also been in a variety of different environments and activities where I've had to think about what it means to be the only woman in the room or one of the few women in the room. But, and so I think I'm hopefully going to sort of be able to use my personal reflections to sort of give you some examples of some of the things that Linda's already talked about, and I think the other speakers will actually engage on. So I'm going to give a few career insights, a couple characteristics of my own sense of what has made me feel successful in my career, some lessons learned, and then try to sort of look forward to what may be out there in the future. And I'm going to do this in 10 minutes, so it's going to be really exciting. So first of all, I have run into pay differentials. I'm sort of old enough now that I was in that group of women who came up when this was an issue still. The first time was at Boston University, where it was really my second job since I got out of graduate school. And it wasn't because I noticed it. It was because one of my other female colleagues noticed that all the other men the men in our office, all of whom, we all have had the same title, we had the same responsibilities. They were making about $5,000 more than all the women. And because of her efforts, we all got increases. But here's a good example of where it wasn't transparent. We never really knew whether we actually ended up at an equitable place. We just knew we got some benefit from sort of making some noise about this issue. I did run into the same sort of issue at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where everything is very public, actually. It's because it was part of the University of California. You could go online and see people's salaries and everything. But about 5 or 6 years into my career there, I noticed that I was getting mid-year equity adjustments to my salary, which was sort of nice to get. And it turned out it was because the labs were very concerned about the fact that the women who were mid-managers were getting lower salaries than the males of similar positions. And so they were hoping to avoid some type of suit against them by the women at the lab. And while I was there, they did avoid it. But actually, about a year or two after I left, a group of women did sue the lab, and in fact won eventually after many years. And it did force the lab to actually change its policies regarding hiring, promoting, and some other personnel activities. And what it showed me was that really without that effort, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory would probably not have changed that much. They would have sort of given it sort of face value of trying to be equitable. And so there are times when it is important to make that, I think, effort to really push an organization to really institutionalize change. Another experience I had was when I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. in a political appointment in the first Clinton administration. At the time I had this opportunity, a couple things became apparent to me. One was that I felt like, wow, am I out of my league? What am I doing here? But I decided I would take the risk. I had to actually resign from my job at Livermore, so I had no safety net to come back to in California. But I thought, why not? And I did actually think, you know, men do this all the time. They just jump off and figure it'll work. And I found pretty quickly that my concerns about not being quite qualified, I felt I had about 60% of what I needed to do the job, were just fine. I learned on the job. I worked very hard, long hours, but I did fine. And in fact, the other thing I realized was that I brought to the job qualities that the men that were my colleagues were not bringing to the job. I had a reputation for being a very effective manager. I was known and got credit for forging collaborative partnerships in a way that the last person in my position had actually undermined terribly, and that's why the two things I was awarded when I left were very meaningful. They were from organizations that really had been so pleased with the work I had sort of pursued in building bridges between our organization and the intelligence community and some other groups in the Washington context. So what I found was that while my natural tendency is to look for partnerships and collaborations to try to figure out how to communicate and coordinate with others, that my colleagues tended in Washington to be open to confrontation and competition. And unfortunately, that is the norm that seems to predominate in Washington to some degree. But I also found that you didn't have to do that you didn't have to follow that path, that you could find your own path, and that was as effective as any other path there. And in fact, maybe more so, especially given the challenges today.